Hi everyone, and welcome to a new segment on the show I like to call You Don't See That on Television. Ain't I original? Anyway, this mostly came about because while looking through my DVDs the other day, I realized that while I love anime and Japanese cinema in general, I have a lot of Western animation, most of which I grew up with, and some that I just discovered recently, and I have a deep love and respect for it. The good stuff, anyway. So this segment is basically to highlight stuff that I grew up with, or that I enjoy, or stuff that's best left forgotten, that isn't really broadcasting on television anymore, to my knowledge. And it's all going to be Western animation, whether that means it came from America or the UK, just Western animation in general. And I thought, what would be the best place to start with something like this? And of course the obvious answer was with something that everybody grew up with, the Looney Tunes. Now of course I'm not going to try and be stupid enough to talk about the entire Looney Tunes repertoire in a single review, and I'm not even going to talk about it in several different videos. Instead, I'm just going to break them up into sections, starting with one that was never really shown on television to begin with. I am of course talking about the World War II cartoons. Now, of course, the reason why these were never shown on TV is pretty obvious. Many of these cartoons held some very offensive stereotypes for Japanese, German, and Italian people, and so they never made it to airtime, and many of them were actually quickly forgotten after their original air dates. And, you know, once the war ended, there was no need for propaganda cartoons. Luckily, a good majority of these were released in the 5th and 6th volumes of the Looney Tunes Golden Collection, but still, there are quite a few people out there who were even unaware of these cartoons' existence before then. So let's start off by taking a look at one of the most classic forgotten Bugs Bunny cartoons, Her Meets Hare. Her Meets Hare is one of those classic cartoons that definitely would have just fallen by the wayside, never been given another glance, except for the fact that it was a Bugs Bunny cartoon. Aside from the fact that it involves Nazis, it probably doesn't stray far from the classic Bugs Bunny formula. Bugs takes that wrong turn at Albuquerque and ends up tunneling all the way to the Black Forest in Germany, where he's pursued by one of the Nazi higher-ups, who fills the role of Elmer Fudd for the entire cartoon. Of course, since it is a propaganda cartoon, the entire thing is full of Nazi satirism, such as making fun of the goose walk, Nazi salute, Nazi uniforms, and even the German language as a whole. And believe me, they don't pull their punches here. However, there are quite a few sequences in this cartoon that are very notable, the first of which being right at the beginning, where you learn that this is actually the first cartoon where Bugs Bunny uttered one of his most famous phrases.
Say, you know, I knew I should have made a left turn at Albuquerque.
Now, the other sequence of note in this cartoon is one that is very similar to Chuck Jones's What's Opera Doc, which he would go on to create, and this was actually part of his inspiration for it. And many consider to be that cartoon his magnum opus, so it is a shame that this cartoon was not better known, as it does contain quite a bit of history in association with one of the best Warner Brothers cartoons ever made. And in fact, many of the shots seem incredibly similar between the two. And apart from those two sequences, which are very notable on their own, this is still a very, very good Bugs Bunny cartoon, and I would recommend that people try and track it down. While you couldn't really get past all of the Nazi references in it, so it really could never be shown on television, I still am sad that not a lot of people got to see this before it was released on DVD. And that aside, it has since become one of my favorite Bugs Bunny cartoons for one reason. It has Bugs not only imitating Hitler, but also Stalin in the same cartoon. That is awesome.
So, vermacht ein Blitzkrieg an, aber Sauerkrauten mit seiner Haben der Hunderten nennen, mit Stammeln in der Backe, Opfrassen, Pfeffer, Bluten, Fluten, Bluten, Toten, mit roten Toten. Ach, Himmel! Does your tobacco taste different lately?
Now, of course, many of the other cartoons that didn't feature the main Looney Tunes cast were far more blatant in their propaganda, often taking advantage of people's patriotism in order to get them to contribute to the war effort, such as donating aluminum scrap, or in this case buying war bonds. This particular cartoon was so extraordinarily blatant that it actually ended in an advertisement trying to get people to buy war bonds and stamps. And people say that advertisements today are getting out of hand. Now, I will say in their defense that Warner Brothers also had the good sense to satirize America during the war as well. This particular cartoon, The Weekly Reporter, has some great satirization on the things that were happening inside the US during the war, such as rationing, collecting scrap metal, the general economy, what Hollywood was up to, and so on and so forth. And while some of these jokes are definitely dated by today's standards, they are still pretty funny, and it's a great look at what life was like during World War II in America.
Have you any porterhouse steak?
We certainly have, lady. That'll be $1.19.
Another fantastic example of this was the Canine Canteen, a cartoon which featured several Hollywood caricatures drawn in dog form, and was also pretty much just a satire of the idea of the USO show, though it did have a lot less to do with the war than some of the other cartoons I've talked about, and was more just about making some jokes at some of the celebrities' expenses. Now, at the top of this video, I mentioned how many of these cartoons were never shown on TV due to their subject matter and the age of the jokes. I mean, let's face it, most kids in the 90s were not going to get a lot of the references in even the tame cartoons of this era. But with that aside, there were a few exceptions. One that I can actually remember seeing during daytime television was called Daffy the Commando, and it was a great short in its unedited form. But in order for it to play on daytime television, it had to be so heavily edited to cut out all the Nazi stuff in it and any references to the actual World War II scene that it was only about 3 minutes long, didn't make a whole lot of sense, and had no real ending. Now, the only other time I remember seeing some of these cartoons on TV was during a primetime cartoon show called Toonheads, which gave facts about cartoons from every different era, and they had a special on wartime cartoons. And that is where I saw this one, the only cartoon that I've ever really seen where Hitler is the main character, Russian Rhapsody. Now, most people who have seen this cartoon in any real form remember it mostly for its rousing musical number sung by a group of Russian gremlins as they dismantle Hitler's bomber plane. And to be fair, it's actually a pretty jazzy tune, very well written, and gives us a lot of fun stuff to look at.
We like nothing better than to mess up Messerschmitts and send their heavy bombers down to earth in teeny bits.
And as a bonus, as most of you observant people have already probably noticed, many of the gremlins are actually caricatures of people who were working in the offices of Warner Brothers at the time, such as Fritz Freeling, Chuck Jones, and Tex Avery. And I have to admit, that is probably one of my favorite things to see in these old cartoons, is just finding caricatures.